I was curious, I see a lot of mechanics that we've kind of been begging for in Diablo 3 in this. Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this just strictly mobile forever?
Are there any? The current plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS. We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
You can play on your tablet, too.
You know, the only thing worse than the announcement...
It's also on the Switch, you're right.
...is the response to the announcement. Diablo 3 is in fact out for Nintendo Switch and is fantastic, but at the same precise moment, days later, I think the game came out last Tuesday, and BlizzCon was held in Anaheim, California on Friday and Saturday of last week. And it was expected, actually, up until days before the event itself. Long after tickets had been purchased both for travel to Anaheim, and I believe it's $100 a head for the convention itself. So long after people had made their arrangements, there was a post on, I think, Blizzard's blog to the effect of, "We're looking forward to announcing Diablo 4 when the time is right," making it fairly clear that the time was not yet right, but that there would be a major Diablo-related announcement, and with something like 48 hours to go before BlizzCon itself. This is where Blizzard debuts all of its offerings to do with Hearthstone and Warcraft, Overwatch, all of their big franchise titles, of which Diablo is a really sacred one. You know, there's only been 3 games in the series, which is rather remarkable for a now decades-old game. But that is how replayable the classic mouse clicker is. And yes, I did say it was released on Switch, and I got a copy, and I love it. I frankly love just about everything ported to the Switch. That is my favorite console right now. But Diablo is at its core a game that one plays 9 times out of 10 with their keyboard and their mouse. It simply is. It's never sold anywhere near on consoles what it sells for Mac and PC. But consoles, be they the Switch, PS4, Xbox One, whatever, many people will accept. Like, for instance, there was the Spider-Man game released earlier this year that sold by I think somewhere in the multi-millions. That was a PS4 exclusive, and if there was any kind of fan outrage, I'm not aware of it. And I'm sort of plugged into that stuff. I try to pay attention to the news of the day. Granted, the sort of silly news. This is the Matt Sager podcast. But I did not see anything other than just insane amounts of positive reviews for this spectacular, pardon the pun, game. By the way, to derail my monologue for just a moment, because I do want to talk about serious news occasionally, I hope you did your civic duty today. Today was election day in probably not the most important election ever. That one sadly has come and gone. But it's our current most important election ever. A lot is on the line, and whatever your personal political leanings, it's the one bit of power we have. You know, we can complain on our podcasts and on YouTube all we like. Lord knows, my Facebook feed, I've got gripes. I absolutely have gripes. But to actually affect change, you need to go to your local polling station and vote, and I hope you did that today, Tuesday, November 6th. So, what did BlizzCon actually have to offer for Diablo? It's a game called Diablo Immortal, which is going to be, as you heard in the intro to this show, it was not well received, but it's going to be a mobile exclusive for iOS and Android, which means its core base is for people gaming on their phones, although there'll be a secondary market on iPads, Android tablets, and what have you. It's an interesting switch, pun not intended again, as one of the journalists covering the sort of brouhaha that really took Blizzard employees by surprise. They are not accustomed to being jeered at their own events, and it really only got worse from there. Just go to YouTube and enter BlizzCon Diablo announcement. One guy goes to the stage. This is the only time they cheer during the entire press conference for Diablo, is when a guy walks up to the podium and goes, "Just making sure, is this an off-season April Fool's prank?" That elicited massive applause. Sadly, to the best of my knowledge, the only instance of applause during the Diablo event. And then there was the fallout. The fallout was to be expected. Fans were furious. They go to BlizzCon at great expense, traveling to Anaheim because you love video games? The actual price of admission, whatever. But fans went there expecting something quite different. If anything, as someone has pointed out in covering this, they were expecting what they're used to from Blizzard, which is they take a pre-existing property, tweak it, make it better, release it, and it's the perfected version of this germ of an idea that some other developer had. That they basically do a benevolent stealing of games. And in taking other people's ideas and building on them, they create these beloved video game franchises, which last for, in the case of something like Diablo, I think that first game came out in like 97 or something. I know I was playing Diablo 2 on the IATA.com, Matt Sager, in your face, thumb twitching, vibrating, whatever the hell it was, video game show. It was long enough ago that the big conversation about it was, is Diablo 2 better, or do you prefer Icewind Dale? So we're going back to like 2000 at the very latest for Diablo 2. So yeah, Diablo came out in 96, 97. And Diablo 2 was so consistently replayable. I believe it was a PC exclusive, and yet Blizzard had no need to either port it to consoles or to rush out a sequel. Diablo 3 came out in, I believe, 2012. And it is fair to say that any Diablo fan who bought a ticket to BlizzCon, along with the travel expense, which is, that is not a small thing, and the hassle of the flight, they were expecting something other than a port of a mobile game. And what's more is that Blizzard did the reverse of what they usually do. This time, they lent Diablo out. Instead of stealing, they gave the property to another developer, an existing iOS developer, who already has a game of their own. And this is apparently just a reskin of a pre-existing iOS game, branded to look like Diablo, and with the name Diablo Immortal. So when fans go to the App Store, they'll see the name Diablo associated with the game that has a very specific mechanic that they've kept intact, again, since 97 or something like that. And instead, it's just going to be this very generic game branded with Diablo. And the response to those fans, what? You don't have a phone? That is really kind of pissing in your shit sandwich. That is not a good way to react to what was clearly a non-planned, this wasn't some harassment campaign. Those do exist, and they're used, frankly, too often as a straw man or boogeyman when genuine criticism is called for. It's interesting, These industries, they reach a certain level of momentum and success, and they start going, how do we get more money? How do we become richer? How can we milk our audience for money? And as a business, there's nothing wrong with monetizing your product, with getting as much as you can from your customers, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't actually make them angry. And there's a problem when anytime someone says, wow, I was not expecting this and I'm not happy. That's not always a phrase one hears a lot, and a problem that does exist and therefore should not be taken in vain like this. Toxic fandom. There are certainly overly entitled, hateful, immature, dangerous, radical fans who make everything about something like gaming, comics, Star Wars, just awful. But I've noticed for the past 3 to 4 years, I began noticing this in 2013, and in 2015 it began to really ramp up, and now it's just all you hear. Anytime there's a negative review of a book, negative review of a game, a film, a comic, what have you, it is always blamed on toxic fandom. Now, I'll grant you, it does not help that YouTube's algorithm takes a ton of toxic fans and promotes them to the front of the queue. That's very bad. Not only because it presents fans as being hateful people, but because it deprives the industries the ability to right a ship that in many cases is going away from fans, that in the long run will hurt the industry. And while the core mission of any business is to make money, you do sort of want fans. You want evergreen fans that will always buy your product. And when you call everyone that says, hey, I didn't come here expecting a phone game, entitled, you make things much worse. You make the fans much angrier, and it's a hard thing to talk about because I myself have been very reticent on this podcast and in other forums to talk about when products that were once great become awful, or to even just remark on something like sales figures or box office receipts for film franchises, because I'm terrified of being associated with these toxic fans. I read an article recently that really helped me out of what has been this sort of perpetual holding pattern of, oh my God, I don't like everything that Marvel puts out. Am I a toxic fan? If so, when did this happen? And why am I a hardcore liberal New York Jew finding that I concur with some of these rabid right-wing animals who say that certain movies are terrible, certain comics abandon any pretense at quality? And this article was extremely helpful, kind of articulated this general miasma of ideas in my head. It was written by a guy who once wrote for Comics Alliance, the now defunct website. And I really hope I'm pronouncing your name right, sir. David Uzumeri. I'll put up a link to the article. I won't read it to you or anything like that, but I would like to read just one passage from it. It's actually just a sentence fragment, but it is absolutely critical to this ongoing debate between creators and fans. Because, when fans booed the Diablo Immortal announcement, the press immediately leaped to the defense of the developers. And, there is something to be said for, as a paying customer, you are allowed to say when you are not happy, when you feel you have been misled, when you feel you have been sold one thing and you take home something else. Now, for everyone who wanted a Diablo 4 to sit around freaking out that we just got a phone game is rather silly and a big waste of time and energy. But for those who said, I'm going to spend my weekend in Anaheim because I love Diablo so much, and to find out only days before the actual event, after tickets have been sold, that maybe it's going to be something different, and to only once you get there to be told that it was this awful news, that it's going to be a shit mobile game. Monetized, one of these games that's ostensibly free, but in fact is really all about collecting money. So if you want to rise in levels, if you want to get access to the whole game, it's what's called freemium. Pay $1 here, $1 there, a monthly fee here, and it's less the money that matters than the way these transactions interrupt the gameplay flow. Because to truly excel, you've got to spend money. And that takes away from the feeling of accomplishment. You're not really accomplishing anything if you go, well, I've got $9 to spare and now I'm a legend. I'm a +1 paladin or whatever. That is not fun. How those games make as much money as they do is rather, it's something that escapes me. And I don't think it's a wise long-term strategy. But to return to this article, the passage I want to read is this. I think this is absolutely critical to the discussion of whether you're talking about Diablo, Marvel Comics, Star Wars, oh my God, Rick and Morty, which absolutely is infested with toxic fans. But if there's a bad episode and someone reviews it, that does not necessarily make them a toxic person. And yet, in our current environment, they would be accused of such. So, David Uzumeri writes, when existing power structures denigrate and question the integrity of a free and fair press, it opens a hole for an unfair press to seep in. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David. Nailed it with that. You know, no matter the comic, I have of late taken to noticing when a comic is horrifically bad. I'll go, wow, this was there was no editor here. The credits mention an editor, an assistant editor, an associate editor, an executive editor, and a producer. And yet this is garbage. Surely people are talking about whatever happened to this title that used to be a must-buy, that now sells below 5,000 copies a month and isn't even trying anymore. And you go to these websites, be it Comic Book Resources, Newsarama, I mean, that's pretty much it now. A point that David makes in his article, that at Comics Alliance, if they gave a negative review to a comic from Marvel or DC, they would lose access to those comics and no longer be able to give reviews, previews. They'd be shut out. This is something that has been prevalent in films as well, where they keep films locked up and away from reviewers. And it's not because they're afraid of getting too much positive press. They've weaponized the social sphere in which we live. So when they've got something that they know is going to really rock, they can preview it themselves. But the role of critic is important, and critics, by and large, have been largely ostracized, increasingly since about 2009. I think the first time I heard the phrase toxic fandom was in response to the film X-Men Origins Wolverine, which anyone will tell you, Ryan Reynolds is fond of goofing on it. It was the lowest point in the X-Men franchise and possibly the worst comic book film of all time, including the Phantom. It is great to say positive things about a comic, but when I go to these review sites, and I've just read something that has shocked me with how bad it is, I rarely see anything below an 8 out of 10. Because access itself is a premium feature, which once lost, relegates you to the sidelines. And there's really no reason for a reasonable critic who's been shut out of every venue to continue being a critic. But you know who that opens the door for? I hesitate to even invoke this name because it is a hate movement. But the title of David Uzumeri's article is The Road to Comicsgate, a comics industry event in too many parts. And again, paragraph by paragraph, he breaks down, first of all, the fact that Comicsgate is horrendous. Very important to note, there are toxic fans and Comicsgate is among them. I'm scared to even mention their names. But in many cases, including this case, industries make their own murderer. I think about Marvel in the 90s when they were forever on the brink of bankruptcy, when a couple of small-time comic book store owners were pitched an opportunity to buy Marvel Comics and saw how much money they were losing and said, nope, we are not buying into this. There are stories I've been told from people who work there now, who've worked there through the 80s or 90s and beyond, talking about what a terrifying life it was being there in the 90s. How at one point they were selling file cabinets and fax machines to make their bills and pay rent and just survive and print the next issue. And yet there was more effort put into your average issue and more were sold than are today at a time when Marvel is extraordinarily healthy, making an insane amount of money and guaranteed a ton of readers each month. That's the power of the Marvel film franchise. But while I have no doubt that Marvel is very solvent, first of all, they're owned by Disney, so they never have anything to worry about. But even if they were to go independent, they'd be fine. But their comic publishing branch, in my opinion, should not be such a loss leader. Like, obviously, they'll never make movie money. but they could try and put out quality product with more heart than they are currently doing. And I say this as a fan and as someone who thinks about Marvel's long-term health. There was a phrase, Marvel Zombie. I don't know how much it's used anymore, but they had this guaranteed built-in audience of people who were going to go buy like at least half their books every month until these people died. And they were probably going to pass it on to their kids and loved ones. And again, with the Disney streaming service poised to launch soon, I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow, by the way. Marvel is now an entertainment company, of which comics are just one part. But the quality of those comics has dropped so precipitously and continues to do so that I would wonder why they're even bothering at this point. I don't quite get it. And again, they've made more money than if Marvel were to simply close their doors tomorrow, and if all their employees had some sort of share or stake in it, they'd all be fabulously wealthy and could retire, would never have to work another day in their lives. Marvel is doing quite well, certainly in terms of their creative output cinematically, and certainly in terms of their bank accounts. But these films are based, at least in part, on these comics. And so it would make sense to keep that part of the business a little bit healthy so you can keep telling stories, keep making movies, keep making spin-offs, keep creating original content. There's going to be TV shows based on Loki and the Scarlet Witch. They're going to run out of characters from the Avengers franchise. Out of spite. They've done, because Fox has the rights to the Fantastic Four and Sony has the rights to Spider-Man, both those franchises have been really pushed to one side in a way that is rather shocking. Spider-Man much less so, but the Fantastic Four were, up until just a few years ago, an enormous part of Marvel's business, their identity. They were their first super team. And sure, one symptom of toxic fandom is being trapped in an idyllic past. That's not the case here. What I'm saying is, practice nice business and expect nice customers. And when the press pounces on those customers, maybe think for a moment. These people flew to California and got a shit sandwich with a touch of piss. Nobody likes that. That said, if you're a creator, believe me, I understand your plight, and fans can be dicks. Fans, please stop being dicks. Let's all be nice to one another. Get in touch with me. You can contact the Matt Sager podcast via email, matt@mattsager.com, or by phone, 646-535-4788. If you like, you can hit me up on social media. On Twitter, I'm @MattSager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, I'm The Matt Sager. I also have a voiceover page there, Matt Sager VO. And please, let's all join the Matt Sager Podcast Facebook page, predictably named Matt Sager Podcast. And for more of those social media links, articles, blog posts, my voiceover reels, contact info, and a whole lot more, you can go to mattsagervoiceover.com.